missionary journey in these chapters 19, 20, and 21, about 2,800 miles, 3 years. I just think about this morning. So if he traveled 2,800 miles in 3 years, that's about 900 miles a year. I don't know, do you walk 900 miles a year? He mostly was walking here. I mean, there was some of it on a ship, that is true. But so basically, he was coming about 3 miles a day. So I don't know whether you walk 3 miles a day, but he was doing it every day. But he wasn't. Sometimes he was walking more than that because he was stationed there. Sometimes, like he was at Ephesus for a long time. So anyway, it was a grueling life that he lived, and we cannot underestimate that. Although we look back at it from 2,000 years from that time when it was, and maybe it doesn't quite seem as big as it was, and we think, well, he was Paul, so he could just do all those things. But he was also a person that, just like you and I are. So we're talking about Paul's love for the church, and we're about to the end of this. Actually, I'm not sure we're going to get done today. I kind of doubt that we are. But so 4 parts of this from Acts chapter 20, verses 1 through 17. And I'd like to read the context here as we begin, and then we'll get into this morning, kind of pick up where we left off the last time. So Acts chapter 20, verses 1 through 17. And after the uproar was ceased, Paul called unto him his disciples and embraced them and departed for to go into Macedonia. And when he had gone over those parts and had given them much exhortation, he came into Greece. And there abode 3 months. And when the Jews laid wait for him, as he was about to sail into Syria, he purposed to return through Macedonia. A lot said in that first few verses, and maybe try to show us a little more clearly on the map, but a lot happened there. And in verse 4 then, there accompanied him into Asia Sopater of Berea and of the Thessalonians, Aristarchus and Secundus and Gaius of Derbe and Timotheus, and of Asia Tychicus and Trophimus. These going before tarried for us at Troas. And we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, and came unto them to Troas in 5 days, where we abode 7 days. And upon the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul preached unto them, ready to depart on the morrow, and continued his speech until midnight. There were many lights in the upper chamber, and they were gathered where they were gathered together. And there sat in a window a certain young man named Eutychus, being fallen into a deep sleep. And as Paul was long preaching, he sunk down with sleep and fell down from the 3rd loft and was taken up dead. And Paul went down and fell on him, and embracing him said, Trouble not yourselves, for his life is in him. And when he therefore was come up again, and had taken and broken bread, and had eaten and talked for a long while, even till break of day, so he departed. And they brought the young man alive, and were not a little comforted. And when we went before to ship and sailed unto Assos, they were intending to take in Paul, for he had appointed minding himself to go afoot. And when he had met with us at Assos, we took him in and came to Mytilene. And we came thence, and we sailed thence, and came the next day over against Chios. And the next day we arrived at Samos, and tarried at Trogyllium. And the next day we came to Miletus. For Paul had determined to sail by Ephesus, because he would not spend the time in Asia, for he hasted, if it were possible, for him to be at Jerusalem the day of Pentecost. And from Miletus he sent to Ephesus, and called the elders of the church. So we're seeing here in these verses Paul's care and love for the church, and shown by these things, which I'm not going to really go through other than quickly this morning here. His exhortation, in fact, he taught them in these first few verses. He taught them in Ephesus. He taught them as these churches. He went back through his missionary journey. He was giving. He gave of his time. Paul had a life just like you and I do. I just read a devotion the other day. What am I doing with my time? Redeeming the time because the days are evil. And what are we doing with the time? It's kind of easy for me to get into this mode where I'm retired, kind of like I've got six Saturdays every week. Like every day I kind of just do whatever I want to do. I've kind of got to watch that I don't just get into that mindset selfishly that I'm going to do today what I want to do. It's going to be all about me and fulfilling my plans, my desires, just what I want to do. But Paul had time. He gave his time. He gave every day. He didn't have days off and paid vacation, all these things that we really look forward to today. He gave his time. He gave his abilities. Paul was a very skilled, educated, well-rounded man that could have spent his life doing a lot of other things other than the fact that he gave his life to what he felt was the most important thing in the world, spreading the gospel and caring for people. And he gave his money, his talents that he had, and he gathered money from other people and encouraged them to give. So Paul's love for the church is shown by his giving. It's also shown by his persistence, that he kept going on. Time after time, success after success, discouragement after discouragement, being kicked out of town after being kicked out of town. Paul kept going on. He wasn't going to retreat and go backwards and say, I don't want to do this anymore, I quit. He didn't do that. He was persistent. Even as they laid wait for him there in verse 3, as he's about to sail back across, we talked about this before, and they were going to kill him on the ships, the Jews, because they were mad at him. He said, okay, if you're going to do that, then I'm going to walk the whole way around the land route here to get there, because he was persistent. There was nothing that was going to cause him to quit. And last of all, which we're talking about now in these verses, his availability and concern, putting others first and caring about other people, which we see here in these verses that we're going to get to here as he preached this message to the church there at Troas. So hopefully you can see this. The purple line there starting from the mid-left going up around clockwise to 3 o'clock there on the clock. We're going to look at that way. It's the return route that he took, because he could have sailed just kind of straight line across there to go across to Troas, but he didn't because they were laying wait for him. This was his return route there, part of this 2,800-mile trip that he took. So this passage, as we talked about the last time, which was September the 29th, is the earliest recorded description of a Christian worship service. Up at this point, we don't really have that recorded. We know that they gathered together in the temple and other places. They met together, but we don't really have a description of a church service before this one, at least not a Christian one. So this is a good description of it. So some noteworthy features of this worship service I want to talk about today. First thing, we talked about this last time, it was on Sunday. It wasn't on the Sabbath day. Jews were always worshiped on the 6th and the 7th day of the week on the Sabbath day, that we don't worship on. Why do we worship on Sunday? Because of the resurrection. Jesus rose from the grave. The great one, us our victory on Sunday, on the first day of the week. So we worship on Sunday to commemorate that. We don't worship on Saturday anymore. And we went through all the reasons last time. I'm not going to go through all those today. But full of chock, the Bible is chock full of reasons why we don't worship on Saturday. The second thing that we see about the service, it was held in a large home. They didn't have buildings like we do. We are very fortunate. Oftentimes we have these missionaries come through. I'm often humbled or feel guilty of the fact that we're so blessed here. These people don't have a building. They're gathering money together to start a new building and finally going to have their first building. And we are so blessed by the fact that we have so much here, and that we don't have to worship in a home or in some other rented facility somewhere. We are so blessed that they worshiped in a large home, and the service was held to celebrate the agape, the love feast, as they came together to gather around the Word, to fellowship, to remember Jesus and what He had done for them as this meal that they had together and in the preaching of the Word. So although Paul intended to depart on the very next day, what's he doing? What do you do when you're going to go on a trip, a long trip? What do you do the day before? Pack. Somebody said pack. That's right, we pack. And what's the pack part of? The what? Packing is part of the preparation. So what else do you do that day before you're going to go? I think, oh, I can't wait till I get home. What do normal people do? You go to bed early. Yeah, then if I go to bed early on a day where I'm going to go away, then I'll sleep anyway, so probably not make much difference. But go to bed early, you kind of get yourself prepared for it. So Paul's, he wasn't really working on getting prepared for the fact he was going to leave the next day. He intended to depart. He prolonged his message here as he was preaching them till midnight. So verse 7 says, on first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul preached unto them, ready to depart on the morrow, and continued his speech until midnight. So what Paul said, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this opportunity to speak to the people and to instruct them further and to encourage them further and to build them up in the faith more and to help them to become more grounded and settled in the faith. I'm going to make myself available to somebody else. I'm not going to just stay home and meet my own needs and pack my suitcase and get a good night's sleep and all these things that we would want to do in a day before we were going to make a trip. Paul said, I'm going to preach to these people. So although he was about to leave on a long, difficult journey, Yet his love for the church made him so that he was available. As long as the members of the church needed him, he was going to be there for them. He was going to instruct them. They were infant churches. Today we rely so much on the fact that we're established and we don't really need all that. But they were infant, and Paul knew that, and Paul made himself available to help them every time that he could. How available are we? So, giving no thought for his need for rest, Paul used every available minute to teach the believers at Troas, and maybe more minutes maybe than they wanted. Verse 11 indicates Paul kept on speaking until it was time for him to leave. He didn't just say, well, okay, I'm going to preach till midnight. Verse 11, we see there, when they were come back up again after the Eutychus had fallen down dead and was alive again, and broken bread and eaten, he talked a long while, even until the break of day. It wasn't like, okay, it's midnight, I guess we'll just break up the meeting and go home, or we just had this traumatic experience where the guy fell out of the window and he got killed and came back to life again. Well, let's just go back up and keep on going. So Paul kept this up until it was time for him to leave in the morning. He didn't just stop there. So Luke, the eyewitness, tells us there were many lamps in this upper room. So you see here in verse 8, there were many lights in the upper room where they were gathered together. They weren't like lights like we have. These lights, you really don't know they're on unless it is too dark in here. You turn them on and you see that they're on. They don't have any really effects, but these kind of lamps they had, where these were candles or oil lamps of some type, so they were burning there in that upper room where they were gathered together. And Luke was part of this thing. He had joined Paul again, so he was part of this situation. So there were many lamps. So what do lamps put off? What do oil lamps put off? Any of you have an oil lamp? Nobody does? I don't believe none of you have an oil lamp. What? Light and heat, and something else too. Smoke. They put off smoke, light, and heat. So this was probably an April time frame when this was going on. So you have a large group of people gathered in an upper room. Are upper rooms warmer or cooler than lower rooms? Warmer. Usually very, very much normal. So this was kind of an environment for a warm place with smoke-filled room, because there were many lamps here in this room. So kind of trying to give you a picture of what was going on here, where they were gathered together. And so Luke tells us so many lamps that they caused an environment that probably wasn't very good. But also, he may have been telling us this to show that they weren't afraid to say, hey, here we are. You know, neighbors, friends, people around us, Jews in the community, whoever it is. We Christians, we are in this upper room. We have all these lights on. We're not hiding some dark place somewhere, just using a candlelight to expose ourselves. We are here in this upper room with all these lights burning because we are not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. We are not ashamed of the fact that we are Christians, and we are not ashamed to be known who we are and where we are and what we're doing. Sometimes I think it's very easy for us in the day in which we live, although we have it so easy. We want to hide our faith and belief in Jesus. We don't want other people to see it or know about it. We don't want people to think that we're different. We don't want people to think that we're weird. Honestly, folks, if you think about this, if you're afraid that somebody thinks that you're weird, what difference does it make in 2024 if someone thinks you're weird? Honestly. I mean, there's so many weird people in the world. What difference does it make if somebody thinks that you're weird? If I'm going to be weird, I want to be weird for Jesus. I mean, they think, well, you're weird. Like, that's okay. That's okay. I want to be weird. I want to be different. Jesus said that we're to be a peculiar people of his own, that we ought to be different. There ought to be something different about us. So what difference does it make if people think that you're weird? You get dressed up and you go to church on Sunday. You don't need to sneak out to your car. You don't need to hide your Bible under your coat as you go out to your car. You don't need to hide at work and laugh at people's dirty jokes or all those other things. It's okay to let your faith be known that you're a Christian. You don't need to be afraid. We don't need to hide. We don't need to be afraid to let our light shine. And truly, in the most literal sense, these people were letting their light shine, their physical light of these lamps that they had in that upper room, that everybody could see, like, here we are. We're letting our light shine, and we're talking about Jesus. I can remember when I grew up in Smithfield. I grew up at 825 Juniat Avenue was where a house was. It's across the street now, but where our old shop was. But right up in the corner, around the corner, there was a church there. Can't remember what they called the church, but this thing's in the 60s now, so that church was a brown shingle church, and people would go there. At that point in my life, I went to church occasionally, but they went to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and when they were in there, I mean, they were let to roar. You could hear them singing and praising the Lord, and it wasn't like they weren't afraid of anybody to know that they were in there and that they were a church and they were serving Jesus. You went to that church, didn't you?
Yeah, it was Smithfield Community Bible Church.
Smithfield Community Bible Church. Yeah. I can remember that church. The Fegleys went there. Tom and his family, they went there to that church. But they weren't afraid. I mean, they were singing her out, bellowing her out. Like, folks, we don't need to be ashamed. Kind of my point here. These people weren't ashamed to let it be known that they were Christians and that they were letting their light shine there. So most likely Luke mentions the lamps to help us explain to us why the room was very conducive to make a person sleepy. Again, the day which we live, it seems like we have all the conveniences. We don't have smoky rooms. We don't have it too hot because we air condition. We have it too cold because we heat it. But still, it becomes very conducive for us being comfortable to get sleepy. So this young man sitting in the window got sleepy. So the oil-burning lamps would have added fumes and smoke to the stuffy atmosphere because there was no air conditioning in that room that night or anywhere else in the world at that point in time, actually in history. So there was this young man named Eutychus. Why do you think this incident's even recorded? Wouldn't the narrative kind of been the same, that Paul came there and preached to them and went on the next day? I mean, it does show that God's power flowed through the Apostle Paul to be able to raise this boy back to life again. But what about a young boy? Why mention a young boy? Jesus interested in children? Jesus repeatedly made it known, like, don't despise the little ones. It'd be better for you to have a millstone hung around your neck and thrown to the sea than to offend a child. But this young man was a good example to us, I think, in some ways here. So Eutychus, I think, must have had a heart for God, even as a boy. You think it's possible for children to have a heart for God? Not just a programmed heart where, okay, we're going to church today. Okay, I'm going to go to church today. And so you go to church, you take them to church, and the Sunday school teacher says, who made the world? God made the world. And they answer God to every question because they got this all programmed in themselves. But, a child, when it gets to be a certain age, and John MacArthur points out that this child, from the word here, P-A-I-S, I think maybe it comes up here, was probably indicative of the fact that he was probably between 8 and 14 years old. So he was getting old enough that he didn't maybe just have a forced desire for God in his heart, but he had a desire sincerely in his heart that he wanted to know God. And it's an encouragement to me. How many young men would attend a church service that lasted all night? We'll get to adults here in a little bit, but how many, you kind of drag a 13-year-old or whatever, a 12-year-old, 14-year-old to church, but how many would want to be in a church service that lasted all night? Mommy, I'm tired, I want to go home. Mommy, it's past my bedtime. You always make me go to bed at 9 o'clock, it's past my bedtime, I want to go home. How many young people would have a heart that they said, I want to go to a church service, I'm going to stay there, even though it lasts all night? I think it's so encouraging to see younger people have a sincere heart to know God and to love God. What did Jesus say? They said, what's the greatest commandment? Jesus said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, to love God. Here's this boy, even at a younger age, he had a heart where he wanted to know God, and he wanted to know and love the living God. He wanted to love God with all his heart. Oftentimes, I'm afraid in the society in which we live, we dismiss and downsize Christianity to young people. We want to gain their heart for God by entertaining them or by giving them some user-friendly version of Jesus and not who the true Jesus, the Savior of the world, the Creator of the universe really is. And I think that indicative of this boy is the fact that he wanted to know the true and living God. He wasn't there to be entertained, although he ended up being the entertainment for the night, I guess, as he came back to life again, as Paul raised him from the dead. But he really wanted to know God. He was there for the right reason that night. So Eutychus found his way to maybe what we might consider the best seat in the house, because he got himself perched on a windowsill there, where he had an open window and hopefully maybe some breeze coming in and fresher air than maybe other people were experiencing in that room, maybe a little cooler in that place where he was, and so he was there. And so you kind of can see him there, his back against one side of the window and his feet propped up on the windowsill. Just relaxed there in that position, warm, maybe feeling a little comfortable. But however, he began gradually to sink into a deep sleep. And so we see in verse 9, there sat in a window a certain young man named Eutychus being fallen into a deep sleep. You ever fall asleep in church? You ever fall into a deep sleep in church? That's scary. That is scary, falling into a deep sleep in church, especially if you start snoring or something. But so it says he fell into a deep sleep. And as Paul was long preaching, he sunk down with sleep and fell down from the third loft and was taken up dead. So he fell into this deep sleep, and you know when you get a deep sleep, you sure don't have much balance. So he fell out the window. So do you ever get sleepy in church? You ever get sleepy in church? I'll tell you this is just me, but when I was younger, I would see people sleeping in church, and I think, you ungodly, wicked, no good sinner. Why would you come to church to sleep? Why are you looking at me like that? Why are you looking at me? I think, why would you come to church to sleep? As I get older, I think, I only wish that I could still feel that way. Why do people sleep in church? Maybe sometimes it's because it's really important to them. You kind of like coming here to fulfill my duty and kind of do my thing, and I've kind of already got done, so I'm just kind of like, okay, I'm here putting in my time. I don't really care what's going on. I didn't really come here to worship God, to show God how important He was to me, so I just kind of doze off and go to sleep. Hopefully that's not why somebody falls asleep. I get sleepy in church. I get sleepy in church. I wish I didn't. As I get older, the more older I get, the more tired, sleepier I get, the more easy I sit still. In fact, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but I just went to a sleep doctor this week. Waited months to get into this lady. Very nice lady, probably one of the best referrals of a doctor I've ever had. State college named Caitlin Smith. But so they asked a million questions about, you sleepy during the daytime. I said, I'm sleepy if I sit still. And that was kind of one of the things they had, like sleepy when being sedentary. So I am. If I sit still, if I watch TV, if I sit still, I become sleepy. I wish I didn't, but not because I want to. I don't come to church and go to sleep because I want to. If I get drowsy in church, it's not because I want to, and I just fight it, and I dislike it, and it's not because I want to. It's not because I want to be irreverent. Sometimes it's just because I feel comfortable and relaxed. I feel it's easy for me. If you're going to be watching, I shouldn't be talking about this because you're going to watch me in the church service this morning. Sleeping? I find it easier. When I teach Sunday school, then because it kind of got me keyed up, then I go and sit down. Then I really find it easier for myself to become comfortable and relaxed, and just for my mind to get off and get drowsy. But probably shouldn't have brought any of that up. What made him sleepy? The fumes from the oil lamps, the stuffiness of the crowded room, his youth. He's just a boy. Oh, how you wish when you bring your kids to church that they would sleep, huh? Have to get to be a certain age, and they're a little like, will you please just go to sleep and be quiet so you're not hollering or making noise or whatever. So we have a nursery or somewhere else where we keep the kids or take them downstairs or whatever because they're antsy and fidgety and just kind of be calm. So here's where we come up with this word. The fact that he was a boy suggested between 7 and 14 years old, so just young. The lateness of the hour. You keep your kids up late, what happens to them? They get crabby, grouchy, grumpy. So you kind of like, this was late here, so this kid probably got sleepy and fell asleep. So Paul kept on talking as he was overcome by sleep, and he fell down from this third floor, and he picked him up dead. So do you think that's very legitimate, that if you fall down from 3 floors, you're going to probably hit and you're going to be dead? I think that's very possible that he was, and he did. So he fell down from this window, they went down, he was dead. Great, Paul. Great. Look like you did now. If you would have just been quiet, if you just ended the service after 45 minutes like you're supposed to, the guy wouldn't have fallen out of the window. If you had just had some common sense, Paul, if you just realized that you don't need to just keep blah, 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 blabbing, you keep talking forever, this would never happen, and it's all your fault, Paul. I don't know whether, I can't imagine that some people didn't think that. Like, if you had just been quiet, Paul, if this got over a long time ago, this would have never happened. oftentimes we want to make sure we don't get into positions where something that we don't want bad to happen happens, even though we do that at the expense of not realizing blessings that God can bestow upon us. And even here in this situation, if God would cut that off, the blessing that came as a result of what they thought was bad ended up being a very good and positive thing, an indication of God's power and goodness. So Luke declares that Eutychus was dead. Luke was a what? What was Luke's occupation? A physician. Where do you find that at? Colossians 4:14. Maybe you have that here in the next verse. Colossians 4:14. Luke, the beloved physician, as Paul calls him in that verse, was able to determine that the boy was dead. It wasn't like Luke said, yeah, he looked like he was dead. The boy was dead. His life had left him. And so the shocking event broke up the meeting. They all ran downstairs from the 3 floors, and Paul finally comes down. So the some believers gathered around Eutychus' body, again, probably going through some of the things that I just went through and being upset by that. So the tragedy was turned into triumph, though, when Paul went down with the others and fell on him and embraced him and said, "Do not be troubled. His life is in him." If this didn't mean by this that he had not died, but Paul now by falling on him and embracing the boy, that his life had come back to him and God had brought him back to life again. So this kind of reminiscent, a couple Old Testament examples here. One of them is Elijah. Remember Elijah's story in 1 Kings 17:21 when God went and told Ahab, it's not going to rain for 3 years. And Ahab said, you're going to skin your hide, bud. And so Elijah went, and God took care of him, and he ended up had him go to the widow Zarephath, and he cared for her. She didn't have any food, and she was going out to prepare the last meal for her and her son. And then the son died, and Elijah told her, you take care of me, and God's going to take care of you. And then the son died, and she kind of got upset with Elijah and said, why'd you slay my son? And Elijah went and laid on him 3 times, and his life came back to him again. And also Elisha, in 2 Kings 4:34, when he was going through the town there, a Shunammite lady said, hey, I want to make a room for this guy. This guy is special. She could sense that there was something special about Elisha. I guess I'd like to talk about that because don't you like it when people see there's something special about you, that Jesus is in you? And she saw that about Elisha, that he was God's man. And she said, let's make a room for this guy. So when he comes through our town, he stays with us. Every time he comes, just automatically he stays with us. And so they did that. And he said, Gehazi said, we ought to do something with this lady. And they found out that she'd never had a child. So he pronounces God's blessing upon her. She had a child. She had a child. Then when that child was getting older, he went out to work in the field with his dad, and he had something wrong with his head, and he died. And again, then Elisha laid on this boy, and he came back to life again, kind of like Paul did here in raising the dead. So we serve a mighty, powerful, wonderful God. So Paul's statement, his life is in him, does not mean that Eutychus had not died, but rather that his life had been restored. And so Paul commanded them to stop being troubled and stop the shock waves and the sorrow and the wailing, because a wonderful thing had happened here. And we don't need to just be all shook up about this, because God is so good. But turn this bad thing into a good thing, because God is so good, and don't be all worried about that. So I think we'll just stop here for today, because I'm already a little bit past time. So hopefully we can finish the next time. I've just got 10 more here. So Heavenly Father, thank you for today. Thank you for the willingness that we see of the Apostle Paul to always make himself available to people, to minister here to these people, and even be willing to take a day when he, in our way of thinking, would be a better spent time preparing for the trip that lay ahead of him. But instead of doing that, he went and talked to these people to teach them, to encourage them, to help them to become better Christians, stronger in their faith, more settled in him, in you, Father. And I praise you that we have this example of his being available to other people. Father, help us be available. Father, so oftentimes we get so busy and we think that we don't have time for people, and we want to pursue our own interests and desires and plans, and we forget about other people and the needs other people have, especially spiritual needs. Father, help us to be mindful of others and to love and care for people like you do, that you want us to do for other people. Thank you for your love for us. Father, help us to share that with others this week. Please bless the remainder of this day, Father. May all that's done in this place this day honor and glorify and please you. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. God be with you and give you a great week.